I still remember the exact moment I handed my parents the keys. My mother's hands were trembling so much that she almost dropped them. My father didn't say a single word for nearly a minute. He simply stood on the front porch, looking across the calm lake as if he couldn't believe the view belonged to them now. That morning was supposed to become one of the happiest memories our family would ever have. Instead, it became the beginning of the biggest betrayal I had ever experienced. My name is Helena Smirnova. I'm 36 years old, and for most of my adult life, I believed that if you worked hard enough, planned carefully enough, and treated people with respect, life would eventually reward you. It wasn't an easy road. I built my career as a financial consultant from the ground up after moving hundreds of miles away from my hometown with almost nothing except determination. While many of my friends upgraded cars every few years or bought luxury handbags and expensive vacations, I chose a different path. I saved. I invested. I worked weekends. I accepted projects nobody else wanted. There were nights when I slept only 4 hours because deadlines mattered more than comfort. Whenever people asked why I pushed myself so hard, I always gave the same answer. My parents deserve an easier life than the one they gave themselves raising me. They had sacrificed everything. My father, Viktor Smirnov, spent nearly 40 years working construction. His knees were permanently damaged. His shoulders never fully recovered after decades of lifting heavy materials. Even after retirement, he still walked with the slow, careful movements of someone whose body remembered every difficult year. My mother, Elena Smirnova, worked evening cleaning shifts while raising my sister and me. She missed birthdays, school performances, family dinners. Not because she wanted to, 'cause paying rent always came first. Growing up, we rarely complained. We knew every dollar mattered. Watching them get older made me realize something. They had spent their entire lives making sure my sister and I had opportunities they never had. Now it was finally my turn. Through years of saving, I found the perfect property. A beautiful lake cottage sitting on a quiet shoreline overlooking Pinewater Lake. The house wasn't enormous. Didn't need to be. It had 3 comfortable bedrooms, large windows that filled every room with natural light, a wraparound porch where my parents could enjoy their morning coffee, a private dock where my father could spend quiet afternoons fishing. The backyard was surrounded by tall trees that offered privacy without blocking the view of the water. Every room felt peaceful. Every corner felt welcoming. Price was $510,000. It was the biggest purchase of my entire life, and I never questioned it for even a second. Seeing my parents smile as they walked through each room made every late night at work worth it. My mother kept touching the kitchen countertops, laughing softly as she imagined cooking family dinners there. My father spent almost an hour standing on the dock without saying much. He simply watched the lake. I knew exactly what he was thinking. For the first time in decades, he could finally rest. About 2 weeks after I gave them the cottage, another opportunity came along. Several relatives living overseas invited my parents to stay with them for 6 weeks. They hadn't seen each other in years. I insisted they should go. "The cottage isn't going anywhere," I told them. "You've earned this trip." Before leaving, I hired a local caretaker named Daniel Mercer. Daniel had managed several lakefront properties in the area for years. His responsibilities were simple. Check the house once every week. Water a few outdoor plants. Collect mail. Make sure everything stayed in good condition until my parents returned. I also installed security cameras around the exterior of the property. Nothing unusual. Just enough to give me peace of mind while I returned to work in the city. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Daniel sent weekly updates. The lawn looked great. The weather was beautiful. No signs of damage. No unexpected visitors. Nothing to worry about. Or at least, that's what I believed. Around 3 weeks later, on a Wednesday afternoon, I was finishing a client meeting when my phone started ringing. The number wasn't saved in my contacts. Normally, I would have ignored it. For some reason, I answered. "Hello?" A confused woman's voice immediately replied. "Hi. I think there's been some kind of mistake." "What do you mean?" "My family rented your lake cottage for the week." I frowned. "I'm sorry. We're standing outside right now, but our access code isn't working." I felt my stomach tighten. "I think you've got the wrong address." She paused. Then she slowly read the full property address. Every single word matched my parents' cottage. Exactly. I stood up so quickly that my chair rolled backward across my office floor. "I'm sorry," I said carefully. "Can you repeat that?" She did. Same address. Same property. Then she added one sentence that completely changed everything. "We booked it almost a month ago." My heart began pounding. That wasn't possible. Cottage had never been listed anywhere. Not for rent. Not for vacation stays. Not for anything. I bought that house for one purpose only. It was supposed to become my parents' forever home. So why? Were complete strangers standing outside believing they had legally rented it? I left my office less than 5 minutes after that phone call ended. The 4-hour drive to Pinewater Lake felt endless. Every possible explanation ran through my head. Maybe the woman had entered the wrong address. Maybe someone had copied photos from a real rental listing. Maybe this was nothing more than a bizarre misunderstanding. By the time I reached the cottage, I had almost convinced myself everything would make sense. It didn't. A silver SUV was parked in the driveway. 2 children were sitting on their suitcases near the porch while their parents repeatedly checked their phones. The moment I stepped out of my car, the woman from the phone call recognized me. "You must be Helena." I nodded. "I'm so sorry. Can I see your reservation?" She immediately handed me her phone. The listing looked incredibly professional. High-resolution photos of my parents' cottage. Every room had been photographed from flattering angles. The description advertised private lake access, luxury amenities, complimentary kayaks, and peaceful family vacations. Even worse, there were dozens of glowing reviews. This place was spotless. Perfect lake getaway. The property manager was incredibly helpful. "We'll definitely book again." I stared at the screen. The earliest review had been posted nearly 2 months earlier. That made no sense. I had only purchased the cottage a few months ago, and my parents hadn't even moved in permanently yet. The woman looked embarrassed. "We paid in full." "I believe you," I replied quietly. She wasn't lying. Neither was I. Someone else had lied to both of us. I apologized repeatedly before helping the family find a nearby hotel for the night. Fortunately, there were still a few vacancies because it wasn't peak tourist season. I even covered their first night stay. It wasn't their fault. As they drove away, I remained standing in the driveway, staring at my own house. Whoever had done this knew the property well enough to make strangers believe it was a legitimate vacation rental. I unlocked the front door. Nothing looked out of place. The furniture was exactly where my parents had left it. Kitchen was spotless. Bedrooms were clean. No signs of forced entry. No broken locks. No missing valuables. The strangers had really been staying here. Someone had been making sure they treated the property with unusual care. That realization disturbed me even more. I checked every exterior security camera. Nothing. No recordings. Every camera had gone offline nearly 3 weeks earlier. Power hadn't failed. The internet hadn't gone down. Someone had deliberately disconnected them. I immediately called Daniel Mercer, the caretaker. He answered on the second ring. "Everything okay, Helena?" I need you to tell me something. Of course. Has anyone been staying at the cottage? There was a brief silence. Then he answered with complete confidence. Well, yes. I felt my pulse spike. What do you mean, yes? I thought you already knew. I've been checking the place every week just like you asked. Different families have been coming and going. My voice became noticeably sharper. Daniel, I never rented that house to anyone. Silence. Longer this time. What? I never authorized anyone to stay there. I don't understand. His confusion sounded genuine. You told me someone would contact me if guests arrived. I never said that. Another pause. Then Daniel spoke more slowly. A man introduced himself as your property manager. Every muscle in my body tensed. He knew your full name. He knew where the spare keys were stored. He knew the security gate code. He even had copies of maintenance schedules. He said you were too busy working in the city to handle guest arrivals. I leaned against the kitchen counter. My breathing became shallow. Whoever this man was, he possessed information that only someone close to my family should have known. Did you ever ask for identification? Daniel sighed. I did the first time. He showed paperwork with your name on it. What paperwork? I honestly didn't study it very closely. He seemed legitimate. He knew details about the property that only an owner would know. I closed my eyes for a moment. Professional. Prepared. Confident. This wasn't an impulsive scam. Someone had carefully planned every step. After ending the call, I searched every major vacation rental website I could think of. Nothing. The listing had already disappeared. It had been removed within hours, almost as if someone knew I had discovered it. That made one thing painfully clear. The person behind this wasn't acting blindly. They were watching. The next morning, I visited several local businesses around Pinewater Lake. I started with the marina. No one recognized the property. Then I stopped at a small grocery store. Still nothing. Finally, I walked into a family-owned coffee shop overlooking the lake. The woman behind the counter smiled politely when I mentioned my parents' cottage. Oh, you're finally here. I frowned. What do you mean? I've seen your property manager checking guests in several times. My stomach dropped. You've met him? Oh, yes. He usually grabbed coffee before welcoming new families. Very polite man. Always dressed nicely. Dark blazer. Expensive watch. Black Range Rover. She thought for a moment before adding one more detail. He said he was helping relatives who lived out of town. Something about that sentence bothered me. Helping relatives. Sounded strangely familiar. Then another memory surfaced. A family barbecue nearly 6 months earlier. Someone had used those exact words while discussing lake properties. I suddenly remembered who owned a black Range Rover, who always wore tailored jackets, who couldn't stop talking about real estate investments. Corvin Hale. My sister's father-in-law. The thought seemed ridiculous. Why would he risk everything over a house that wasn't his? I wanted to dismiss the idea immediately. But the more I thought about it, the less impossible it became. There was only one problem. Even if Corvin was involved, how had he convinced complete strangers, local businesses, and even my caretaker that he had the legal right to rent out my parents' home? The drive home from the coffee shop felt longer than the one from the city. Corvin Hale. The name refused to leave my mind. I kept telling myself I needed proof before accusing anyone. Corvin wasn't just some distant acquaintance. He was my sister's father-in-law. We had attended birthdays together, holiday dinners, graduation parties. He had been inside my parents' cottage more than once while we were preparing it for their move. He knew the layout. He knew where we stored extra supplies. He even complimented the view from the dock, saying lakefront properties always appreciated in value. At the time, I thought it was casual conversation. Now every word replayed differently inside my head. The next morning, I met with a real estate attorney recommended by one of my clients. I wanted to know whether anyone had somehow transferred ownership without my knowledge. The attorney requested every document connected to the purchase: closing paperwork, title insurance, county registration, mortgage records. By late afternoon, he called me back. Legally, nothing has changed. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. So the deed is safe? Completely. No fraudulent transfer. No forged ownership filing. No hidden liens. Everything still listed me as the sole owner. For a moment, I felt relieved. Then another question immediately replaced that feeling. If Corvin or whoever was responsible didn't pretend to own the house legally, how had he convinced rental platforms to approve the listing? The attorney suggested requesting verification records from the vacation rental company. It wasn't easy. Privacy policies prevented them from sharing much information. However, after I provided proof of ownership and explained that unauthorized rentals had occurred, their legal department agreed to cooperate. The report arrived 2 days later. I expected forged deeds, fake identification, counterfeit signatures. Instead, I found something far more unsettling. The account had never claimed to be the property owner. It identified itself as the property's authorized manager. According to the submitted documents, the owner had appointed a local management company to oversee guest reservations. Company name meant nothing to me. Lakeside Executive Property Services. I had never heard of it, but attached to the application were photographs. Not random pictures. Detailed images. Electrical inspection stickers. Utility account labels. Appliance model numbers. Emergency contact sheets hanging inside the laundry room. Maintenance schedules taped inside the utility closet. Serial numbers from the heating system. Copies of neighborhood association guidelines. Every photograph had been taken inside my parents' cottage. Someone had quietly documented nearly everything. Suddenly, I remembered something that had seemed completely harmless months earlier. Furniture delivery day. Several people were walking through the house. Contractors, electricians, internet installers, family members. Corvin had offered to help coordinate deliveries while I handled paperwork outside. At one point, I walked back inside and found him taking pictures. When I asked why, he smiled. "I'm sending room measurements to recommend furniture covers." Sounded reasonable. I never questioned it. Now I realized those photographs had served an entirely different purpose. He hadn't been measuring furniture. He had been collecting evidence. Enough evidence to convince strangers that he legitimately managed the property. Every document submitted to the rental platform matched details that only someone with inside access could know. There was no fake deed because he didn't need one. He simply built an identity that looked trustworthy. The rental company approved him because every question they asked received accurate answers. He knew the square footage, the age of the roof, the septic inspection date, the emergency maintenance contacts, information that even some homeowners would have needed to look up. The deception wasn't flashy. It was methodical. Then another document caught my attention. A maintenance authorization form. The signature wasn't mine. It wasn't even a convincing forgery. Simply said, H. Smirnova. No full first name. No legal signature. Just an initial and a last name. Apparently no one had questioned it. The attorney leaned back in his chair after reviewing everything. This wasn't identity theft. It was confidence. He provided enough accurate information that nobody asked for more. That sentence stayed with me. Confidence. Not force. Not hacking. Not stolen ownership. Just carefully earned trust. I called Daniel again. This time I asked him to think carefully about every interaction he'd had with the so-called property manager. Through several minutes, he suddenly remembered something. There was always a printed guest schedule. What schedule? He carried a clipboard. Every reservation was organized. Cleaning dates. Arrival times. Departure times. He even checked smoke detectors before guests arrived. Everything sounded professional. Almost legitimate. Daniel sighed heavily. I honestly thought he worked for you. I never imagined someone would put that much effort into managing a house they didn't own. Neither had I. By now, one thing had become painfully obvious. Corvin hadn't relied on luck. He had built an entire business system around my parents' cottage. And if he had done it this carefully, there was a very real possibility that my family's home wasn't the only property he had been secretly exploiting. For the next several days, I barely slept. Every document I uncovered answered one question while creating two more. Corvin hadn't stumbled into this scheme. He had built it with precision. The more I looked at the timeline, the more impossible it became to believe my parents' cottage was his first attempt. My attorney agreed. People who successfully pull off something this organized rarely stop after one property. That thought stayed with me. If he had done this before, someone else had to know. Instead of focusing only on my own case, I started researching the management company listed on the rental platform. Lakeside Executive Property Services. The business had a professional website, luxury photos, satisfied customer testimonials, claims of managing exclusive vacation homes across the region. First glance, everything looked legitimate, but one detail immediately stood out. Every testimonial used only first names, no surnames, no property addresses, no verifiable information, almost as if the clients didn't actually exist. The business address led to a mailbox inside a shipping center. Not an office. Not a storefront. Just a rented mailbox. That discovery encouraged me to keep digging. I searched public business filings. Company had been registered less than a year earlier. Its listed owner wasn't Corvin Hale. Instead, it belonged to someone named Grant Ellis. Problem was, Grant Ellis didn't appear to exist anywhere else. No social media. No business history. No property ownership. Nothing. It looked like a name created only for paperwork. I asked my attorney whether we could identify who had actually opened the company bank accounts. Unfortunately, that would require legal action. Till then, we needed another angle. That opportunity arrived unexpectedly. Late Friday afternoon, my phone rang. Caller introduced herself as Naomi Beck. Her voice sounded calm but cautious. You're Helena Smirnova, right? Yes. I think we need to talk. We agreed to meet the following morning at a small cafe about 20 minutes outside Pinewater Lake. Naomi arrived carrying a leather folder thick enough to hold hundreds of pages. She looked exhausted. After ordering coffee, she placed the folder on the table. I've been looking for someone connected to Corvin for months. I stared at her. You know him? She gave a short laugh. I wish I didn't. Naomi owned an event planning company that organized luxury weddings and corporate retreats. About a year earlier, Corvin approached her with what sounded like an incredible opportunity. He claimed he was expanding into high-end vacation property management. He needed someone to coordinate premium guest experiences, private chefs, boat rentals, wedding weekends, executive retreats. Everything sounded professional. He even showed her contracts, financial projections, reservation calendars. photos of beautiful homes, including mine. Except I didn't know it at the time. Naomi invested a substantial amount of money into the partnership. First, Corvin paid her exactly as promised. Then the payments became inconsistent. Eventually, they stopped completely. Whenever she asked questions, he blamed delayed guest payments or unexpected maintenance expenses. She became suspicious and quietly started saving every email, invoice, and contract he sent her. Then she opened the folder. Inside were printed emails, signed agreements, payment summaries, invoices carrying the same company name I had already discovered. Lakeside Executive Property Services. Every document pointed toward the same operation. Corvin had simply hidden behind different names. As we compared paperwork, another pattern emerged. Each property generated impressive income for several months. Then the listings suddenly disappeared, only to reappear later under different company names. He wasn't operating one business. He was constantly reinventing it before anyone asked too many questions. Naomi leaned closer. "There's something else." She reached into the folder again and removed a small digital recorder. "I started recording meetings after I realized something wasn't right." She pressed play. Corvin's unmistakable voice filled the quiet cafe. "You don't need to own real estate to profit from it. You just need people to believe you're the one in charge." My stomach tightened. There it was. Not a confession to my case specifically, but an admission that perfectly described the entire strategy. Naomi stopped the recording. "I never thought those words would matter. They matter now." She wasn't finished. There was one place he refused to let anyone visit. What place? He rented a private office above an old boat repair warehouse near the West Marina. He said all his reservation records stayed there. Digital files, financial reports, guest schedules, everything. He believed keeping records away from his home made him untouchable. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt the investigation shifting in my favor. Puzzle pieces were finally connecting. I had proof that Corvin operated through shell companies, evidence that he recruited investors, a recording revealing how he viewed other people's property. And now, a location where the rest of his operation might still be waiting. Those records were still inside that office. They wouldn't just prove what happened to my parents' cottage. They could expose the entire business Corvin had spent months hiding behind polished smiles and carefully rehearsed lies. I didn't drive to the warehouse myself. My attorney stopped me before I could make that mistake. If Corvin really has business records there, we do this legally. He was right. The last thing I wanted was to give Corvin an excuse to claim that evidence had been obtained improperly. Within 48 hours, my attorney filed an emergency request with the court. Based on the documents I had already gathered, the judge authorized investigators to secure the office before any records could disappear. Corvin never saw it coming. According to one of the investigators, he wasn't even at the warehouse that morning. When they entered the office, they expected empty filing cabinets. Instead, they found an operation that looked more like a legitimate company than a scam. Rows of labeled folders, reservation calendars, cleaning schedules, guest arrival checklists, maintenance invoices, digital backups stored on encrypted hard drives. Every booking had been carefully documented. Every payment had been tracked. Every property generated its own profit reports. My parents' cottage wasn't hidden among the records. It had an entire filing cabinet drawer dedicated to it. When my attorney showed me photographs from the investigation, I felt physically sick. There were spreadsheets listing every family that had stayed there, copies of guest messages thanking the property manager, weekly revenue reports, cleaning expenses, commission calculations, even a notebook containing ideas for increasing rental prices during holiday weekends. Corvin hadn't treated my parents' home like a family gift. He had treated it like one of his investment assets. The financial records were even worse. Over 40 completed reservations. More than $130,000 collected from guests. Not $1 had ever gone toward maintaining the property. Instead, investigators traced the money into luxury purchases, international vacations, sports car lease payments, private club memberships, designer watches. Cottage had financed a lifestyle that was never supposed to exist. As investigators continued reviewing files, they discovered something I hadn't expected. Several additional properties appeared in the records. Not every owner had given permission. Some had no idea their homes had ever been rented. Others believed Corvin was merely checking on vacant properties while they traveled. The investigation was suddenly much larger than my family's situation. News traveled quickly. Within days, local authorities contacted multiple homeowners. Some were shocked. Others were furious. Every conversation added another piece to the growing case against Corvin. Meanwhile, my sister finally learned what had happened. She called me late one evening. Her voice was barely recognizable. "You should have told me sooner. I didn't have proof." She stayed silent for several seconds. I asked him, "What did he say?" "He denied everything." That response didn't surprise me. People like Corvin rarely admitted anything voluntarily. The following weekend, our entire family gathered at my parents' house. No one wanted the meeting, but everyone agreed it had to happen. Corvin arrived wearing the same confident smile he always carried. For a brief moment, it looked as though he believed he could still explain everything away. Then my attorney placed several thick binders onto the dining room table. One after another. Photographs, financial reports, contracts, reservation logs, copies of emails, bank transfers, voice recording transcripts. Each document quietly dismantled another lie. No one interrupted. No one argued. The silence inside that room became heavier with every page that turned. Finally, Corvin leaned back in his chair. "I was protecting the property." No one answered. He tried again. The house would have been sitting empty. Still nothing. Then my attorney opened another folder. Bank statements, luxury hotel charges, casino withdrawals, jewelry purchases, patient expenses, each payment linked directly to guest rental income. Corvin looked at the paperwork for several long seconds. For the first time since I had known him, his confidence disappeared. My sister's husband slowly pushed his chair away from the table. He stared at his father without saying a word. Then he stood up. "I don't even know who you are anymore." Those were the only words he spoke before leaving the room. Everything after that happened remarkably fast. Business partners canceled agreements. Investors demanded explanations. The vacation rental platforms permanently removed every account connected to Corvin's companies. Local newspapers reported that authorities were investigating multiple unauthorized rental operations across the county. Polished reputation Corvin had spent decades creating unraveled almost overnight. Ironically, it wasn't one dramatic courtroom speech that destroyed him. It was paperwork. Thousands of ordinary documents telling one undeniable story. By the end of that week, there was no longer any question about what had happened. The only thing left was deciding how much Corvin would ultimately lose for believing someone else's home was simply another opportunity waiting to make him richer. 6 months later, I returned to Pinewater Lake on a quiet autumn morning. The leaves had turned brilliant shades of gold and deep red. The air was cooler than I remembered. The lake was perfectly still. For the first time since buying the cottage, I drove through the front gate without feeling anxious. No strange vehicles. No unfamiliar faces. No fear that someone else believed they had the right to be there. just peace. Exactly what I had wanted for my parents from the very beginning. They had finally moved in permanently. Every room now reflected their personalities instead of looking like a newly purchased house waiting for furniture. My mother's favorite recipes were taped inside one of the kitchen cabinets. My father had filled the garage with fishing equipment, woodworking tools, and small projects he finally had time to enjoy. Family photographs covered the hallway walls. Fresh flowers sat on the dining room table. Cottage had become a home. That morning, I found my parents sitting together on the wraparound porch, drinking coffee while watching sunlight spread across the lake. Neither of them noticed me immediately. They were simply enjoying the quiet. Seeing that moment erased months of stress almost instantly. Everything I had worked for suddenly felt worthwhile again. The legal process continued for several more months. Eventually, Corvin agreed to a civil settlement after the evidence against him became impossible to challenge. He was ordered to repay the profits earned from unauthorized rentals, reimburse legal expenses, and compensate several affected property owners for additional damages. The financial consequences were enormous. But money wasn't the only thing he lost. State regulators completed their own investigation into his real estate activities. His professional licenses were revoked. Several companies permanently ended their business relationships with him. Former investors filed independent claims after discovering they had also been misled. The business empire he had spent years building disappeared piece by piece. Ironically, the very reputation he had relied upon to convince people he was trustworthy became the reason no one wanted to work with him anymore. Trust, once broken on that scale, rarely returns. Naomi eventually recovered much of the money she had invested through separate legal proceedings. Over time, we became genuine friends. Neither of us expected that a painful experience would create such a lasting connection, but life has a strange way of introducing the right people during the worst moments. Daniel, the caretaker, continued working for my parents. Through everything that happened, I never blamed him. He had been manipulated by someone who knew exactly how to appear legitimate. Instead of replacing him, we upgraded the property's security together. We installed a new monitored alarm system. Every exterior camera now recorded directly to encrypted cloud storage. Smart locks replaced traditional keys. Every access code required two-step verification. Emergency contacts were updated. Maintenance visits required written authorization from me. No one would ever quietly take control of that house again. My sister's family needed much longer to heal. She struggled with the realization that someone she had trusted for decades had been living a double life. Her husband chose to distance himself from his father completely. It wasn't an easy decision, but he said he couldn't ignore what had happened to multiple innocent families. As painful as those conversations were, they allowed everyone else to move forward honestly. Sometimes people ask me whether I regret spending $510,000 on a lake cottage. They expect me to say yes because of everything that followed. My answer is always the same. Not for a single second. The house was never just a piece of real estate. It represented gratitude. It represented every sacrifice my parents had made while raising me. It represented a promise that their hardest years would not define the rest of their lives. No scam could erase that. No dishonest person could steal that meaning. Corvin managed to profit from my parents' home for a short time. But greed always demands more than it gives back. He gained temporary income. He lost his reputation. He gained expensive vacations. He lost his career. He gained control over other people's property. He lost the trust of his own family. In the end, the cottage remained exactly what I had always intended it to be. A place where my parents could wake up every morning, step onto their porch, breathe fresh lake air, and enjoy the peaceful retirement they had spent a lifetime earning. As for me, I learned a lesson I will never forget. Protect the people you love. Difficult questions, even when the answers might be uncomfortable. And never mistake confidence for honesty. If someone seems trustworthy simply because they act like they belong, look a little closer. Sometimes the most convincing lies are delivered with the biggest smiles. Thank you for staying with me until the end of my story. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to the channel, leave a comment telling me what you would have done in my situation, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next story. Until next time, take care of yourself and the people who matter most.